Speaking Human.
Today on Speaking Human, we reflect on recent brand announcements from Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's in light of widespread protests against racism and calls for change across the USA.
Speaking Human.
Welcome to Speaking Human, where we simplify the world of marketing for humans. I'm Shad Conley, and with me is my co-host, Patrick Jebber. And Patrick, the list of brands that have vowed to change or review their name, logo, mascot, packaging, or other aspects of their branding based on the rising protests and discussion about systematic racism in America continues to grow. We've got Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, Mrs. Butterworth, Cream of Wheat, Eskimo Pie, and then there are more. There are people talking about other brands like Colgate, the Washington Redskins I see coming up over and over again. So with everything that's going on in the world right now and all the calls we're having for greater racial justice, the perspective has just shifted for a lot of people. I know, for me, thinking about a lot of things I wasn't before, looking at the world in a different way. And many companies are reconsidering their messaging and just taking another look at what they're sort of putting out into the world.
I don't know. It's a time where I think, there's a lot of reflection happening, right? From a branding perspective. And I think just in general, just public consciousness of thinking about where the mindsets were back when these things were created or when they were conceived and how they've survived this long, given that, there is a lot of deep rooted racism in the foundations of those brands, right?
Yeah. I think it's just, and it's looking at things kind of with fresh eyes or with your eyes opened, to maybe some things a lot of us were not paying attention to before and just saying like, is this right? Should this even be here? Taking another look at a lot of these things, and I think that's, hopefully for the better. For the purposes of this show today, we're just going to kind of focus on a couple of those brands I mentioned, Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's. We're going to tell you what they announced, kind of what they're doing, give you a few of our thoughts, the thoughts of other people, maybe what's going to happen with them moving into the future.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the history of Aunt Jemima. What I was really happy about when we were talking about doing the podcast is this idea of talking about the history of these couple brands specifically, because I didn't know the history behind them. You think about Aunt Jemima syrup, because as a child, to me, Aunt Jemima was just like my Aunt Rosemary. Because when you think about it from the eyes and the lens of a child who, I was not raised in a racist household or a household that had racism really infused in it. So it never even dawned on me as a child, right? It's that innocence and that purity of, I think, just seeing the world in a very innocent way.
Yeah. I'll say, you don't know the history of it. It's the syrup,
right.
It's the product. It's the thing. I will say, there was some, at least with Aunt Jemima, like Mrs. Butterworth, as I got older, that's one of those things. There's definitely gone with the wind kind of slavery type thing going on here with this product. Uncle Ben's or like Cream of Wheat. I don't know that I had those enough or thought as deeply on those, but I can't say I never had the thought with Aunt Jemima or Mrs. Butterworth, made that association. I think it was there. I don't know what age it was there, but at some point I made the connection there's some kind of maid or slavery imagery going on here with that.
To me, it's so subliminal at that point. You know what I mean? Because you've seen that brand so much, I feel like it's like anything else. You see a brand so often, you don't even necessarily know what you're looking at, and nor do you reflect on it.
Yeah, which is, a lot of people would say part of the problem. These images, these stereotypes get hammered in subconsciously when you're not even paying attention, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, let's go in a little bit to this history, which I didn't know about either. And I think most people don't because, how many brands do you actually even know the history of? But this one goes back a way. Aunt Jemima brand goes back 130 years. So back to the year 1889, and the brand got its name from the minstrel song Old Aunt Jemima, which Chris Rutt, who was the founder, took for his pancake flour back at that time. And Aunt Jemima was seen as a mammy character, which is a racial stereotype of a happy slave, looking to please her white masters. So Rut, who, originally came up with this pancake flour and tried to sell it, ended up selling his company to a larger milling company. And they ended up hiring Nancy Green, who was a former slave working as a cook, to play this character of Aunt Jemima. And she, went around to like fairs and stuff and was helping to sell the pancake flour as this Aunt Jemima character. And so that's kind of the beginning of it. And over the years, Aunt Jemima became the brand and the character. And, the character has always been on the packaging and stuff like that. The brand did make some efforts over the years to like revise the character, I guess, change it, move it a little bit away from this slavery origin. They replaced the kerchief on the character's head with a plaid headband in 1968. They added pearl earrings and a lace collar in 1989. And then the New York Times had a whole article about reporting on some work the company did in 2016, so not so long ago, overhauling the whole brand. So this basically what they're going to be doing now, they were looking at doing in 2016, basically getting rid of Aunt Jemima, changing the brand in a significant way to like move away from these origins. But they were looking for what they called the right time when the company's owner, who was PepsiCo, wasn't in any sort of controversy or nothing was going on. But I guess some controversy did pop up, which around that time was Kylie Jenner was in a Pepsi ad that sparked some controversy, and then there were management changes at the company, and this effort got backburnered. And so instead, they chose just not to put a lot of money into promoting the brand, which is already a bestseller. Leads us to where we are at the current moment now. The recent announcement, which just came on June 17th. Now, the owner of the company, so there's PepsiCo, who is your, big company who owns all these smaller companies. The smaller company that owns the Aunt Jemima brand directly is the Quaker Oats company. So they announced on June 17th that it's going to remove the image of Aunt Jemima from its packaging and change the name of the brand. So it's kind of goodbye, it's over for Aunt Jemima. This is official. This is going to begin in the fourth quarter of 2020 when they're going to change all the packaging. The name change is supposed to come later. No announcement on what that name change exactly is going to be. So in a press release, Kristen Kropfel, who is Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Quaker Foods of North America, said, "As we work to make progress toward racial equality through several initiatives, we also must take a hard look at our portfolio of brands and ensure they reflect our values and meet our consumers' expectations. We recognize Aunt Jemima's origins are based on racial stereotype. While work has been done over the years to update the brand in a manner intended to be appropriate and respectful, we realize those changes are not enough." So they also state that they're going to continue the conversation by gathering diverse perspectives from both their organization and the Black community to further evolve the brand and make it one everyone can be proud to have in their pantry. The press release goes on to talk about how the brand will be donating $5 million over the next 5 years to create meaningful, ongoing support and engagement in the Black community. And it also talks about PepsiCo's journey for racial equality and commitment to diversity and inclusion, including the money they're, putting towards some initiatives there too. So that's kind of what they're doing and what's going on with the Aunt Jemima brand, what's happening at this exact moment. So a fairly, substantial announcement. The brand is still going to exist in some way, but as it's been known for 130 years, no longer. And the Aunt Jemima character, as far as we know, will not be here anymore.
It's interesting how we've gotten to this point and how long it seems like it's taken for us to make changes that you would think would have been made a long time ago.
Yeah, and this is not a new, thought. There were people going back 50 years plus, noting that this character was racist or there's a racially insensitive or stereotypical component to this character. So this is not like a new idea. This has been around for a long time.
So for Uncle Ben's, According to Marilyn Kern Foxworth, the author of Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, and Rastus, Blacks in Advertising Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, which is a bestseller, has some significance in terms of African American and African studies, looking at advertising and Blacks in advertising specifically. She talks about it, mentions that there was a Ben, there was no surname for Ben that survived records, from what I understand. During World War II, Gordon Harwell, a Texas food broker, supplied this special kind of white rice to the armed forces that was cooked to preserve the nutrients under the brand name of converted rice. Then in 1946, Harwell, this Texas food broker, had dinner with a friend. That was when they decided that a portrait of the maitre d' of the restaurant could represent the brand, which was renamed at that point Uncle Ben's Converted Rice, and then they introduced it to the consumer market. Uncle Ben, who first appeared in ads in 1946, just recently in, I believe, 2007, was being reinvented as just Ben, an accomplished businessman. They shifted his persona from this man that was a servant or a maitre d' or serving other people to now he's an executive. And there was a lot of controversy at the time when they did this in 2007 because they made this change very abruptly and didn't give this man any identity. They just gave him this persona to try to fix the racial stereotypes that I think were along with his Uncle Ben name. Because going back, Uncle and Aunt was a name that they gave to Black people who they didn't want to call Mr. or Mrs.
Yeah, that's key.
Leading up to today, when they acknowledged the fact that they were going to be doing a rebranding effort, Carolyn Sherman, the spokeswoman for Mars, said, "We recognize that now is the right time to evolve the Uncle Ben's brand, including its visual brand identity, which we will do." They admitted the company doesn't know the nature of the changes or the timing, but Carolyn Sherman said, we're evaluating all possibilities. What I imagine probably won't be to the extent of Aunt Jemima, but it probably will be very similar in the way they approach it, right?
Yeah, it seems like they're not committing completely to what they're going to do. Just the idea that they're looking at this, they're aware of the issue, and they're planning on doing something. Seems in all likelihood, you're not going to see that face of Uncle Ben on there anymore. I'd be surprised to see the Uncle Ben name on there in full as it's been. They're not saying that specifically. That's just kind of my take on it.
Yeah. So just thinking through sharing our own personal thoughts on this, do you feel like the changes that they're making are meaningful?
I think they are meaningful in some way. I do think they represent progress, no matter how, small or incremental you may see that progress. It is progress in some sort of way. It kind of shows you the importance of the movement that's happening, that real changes are coming about. Even you may say there's, slight, or they're just a brand, or it's just packaging, but these things do have meaning. These things have impact in the world. So I do think there's relevance to that. There's power to that. You're seeing these headlines that these brands are doing that, and that's just sparking this conversation. It's keeping it going. I think those things are very important right now with what's going on in the world. We talk a lot on this show. I mean, one of the main premises of this show is sort of the intersection of brands and pop culture. I think, culture impacts brands in this specific way and compels them to act. And so you're seeing that right now. This list of brands we gave in the beginning wouldn't be taking action if there wasn't this big swelling wanting action to be taken by corporations, by law enforcement, by government, in all facets of what's going on right now. People have an interest in these changes being made in regards to race. So I do think it is important and it does have meaning. What do you think?
I think the changes are meaningful. I think it's important for brands to be doing them. I think they should have been done a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's where it's frustrating when you start to then reevaluate and reflect on when your eyes are opened, like you said earlier, when your eyes are open and you see the systemic racism that exists. It's frustrating. It's frustrating to think that this still exists in our world.
Yeah. And with something with marketing, or as small as like a brand or marketing where there's no reason for that to exist, right? There's no reason you can't just change that or couldn't have changed that 20, 30, 40 years ago. Like, why, other than just not wanting to, there's just no reason that shouldn't have been done or you shouldn't have taken that action. That's just like complacency. And that shows you part of the problem. We've just never addressed these things. We've just let them lie. And that's part of like the simmering until these things boil because we let these things exist and we never address them.
Yeah, you become complicit in just being comfortable enough to let it just go.
Yeah, you're like, it's fine. It's fine. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's what's frustrating because it's not just your frustration with the companies, right? It's your frustration that as people, we've just let it go. Like I said about myself, like I never reflected enough. It makes me feel stupid. As an adult, I'm like, how have I been that dumb to not see this for what it is? Clearly for what it is, right? But
yeah, it didn't stop me from grabbing a Mrs. Butterworth off the shelf.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe I had the thought, but it didn't stop me from doing anything differently. I don't know. You're like asleep.
Yeah.
You're asleep to the whole thing, or you're just a cog in the machine and going along with it because you're complacent or complicit, like you said. And you're just going along with it as just the way it is.
Right.
That's just too much of that.
Yeah. This is where we get in that idea of just because the public outcry for change and them making the changes now when they could have made them, like you said, decades ago or even years ago or whatever. Do you think that makes these changes authentic? Do you feel like they're authentic? Are they doing them for the right reasons? That kind of thing?
It's hard to say. I'm sure there's many people within these brands who believe in these changes, who want these changes, who maybe wanted them a long time ago and maybe been pushing for them. But you go back to that thing, you're like, were they not influenced by what's happening in the current moment and these changes in perception also in the mainstream? I go back to like the NFL, who's just, pummeling people for kneeling in protest. And then now they come out and say, oh no, we support this whole thing. We support this movement. We support protesting after the majority, the mainstream gets behind it, right? So they cower in face of it when it's their time to take a stand, when they could do something important. But then the mainstream gets behind it and they're like, yeah, no, we're behind this too. I think of something like that. These brands had tons of chances to change and they didn't do it. Now when everybody else is behind it, they're like, oh, okay, now we're going to do the right thing. Not that it's ever easy, but when it gets a little easier, again, you keep going back to it should have been done a lot sooner, right?
Yeah. Public opinion changes everything. If public opinion doesn't support it, they don't change things, right? They just don't. They don't have any reason to. And I think, unfortunately, people are stuck in this type of status quo until they're not. The companies are giant machines that it takes committees and focus groups to make a change when it's like, no, we should just make this change. This is the right thing to do. And so need to be, either a part of the solution or a part of the problem.
Yeah, and I think the hope is at least the end result ends up being something that's for the better, contributes to this positive change we're hoping is going to be made, and this pave a path to kind of a better future moving forward anyways. Hopefully that they're part of that.
Yeah, I agree.
So, what we wanted to do also is, because we are two guys with a limited perspective on this topic, because of our race, because of our perspective, because of where we come from, we just wanted to bring in some other voices on the topic just to provide a little additional insights here today. Particularly, I saw some people talk about Aunt Jemima, why this brand, why some of the representations are racist, or why it needs to go away, why it shouldn't be there anymore. So I wanted to bring those to light to give some additional insights, things, we can't necessarily bring to the table. So the first one I have here is from Rashay Richardson, who is an associate professor in the Africana Studies and Research Center at Cornell University and an artist. So she wrote a 2015 opinion piece for the New York Times titled, "Can We Please Finally Get Rid of Aunt Jemima?" So that was back in 2015. And here's what she said in that piece. This Aunt Jemima logo was an outgrowth of Old South plantation nostalgia and romance, grounded in an idea about the mammy, a devoted and submissive servant who eagerly nurtured the children of her white master and mistress while neglecting her own. Visually, the plantation myth portrayed her as an asexual, plump black woman wearing a headscarf. And later in that piece, she said, "It is about time for there to be some honest conversation about what is at stake in continuing to market products, even nowadays, under names such as Aunt Jemima." And then another quote I have comes from Michael Twitty, who is a culinary historian and food writer from the Washington, D.C. area. So he wrote in an NBC News opinion post, "Since her retirement was announced 2 days before Juneteenth, in the middle of a deeply American season of racial reassessment and social change, the loss of Aunt Jemima caused a typically American furor. The comments on social media ranged from outright rage that political correctness has invaded the already socially distant grocery store to remarks suggesting that liberals had shot themselves in the foot by diminishing the diversity of positive mascots on store shelves. The latter sentiment is what cut me the deepest, especially when expressed by those who said how their perception of black people had been positively shaped by seeing Aunt Jemima's visage. As pleasant and formative an experience as the memory of this particular brand mascot might be for some white people, it's also the root of the problem. The character of Aunt Jemima is an invitation to white people to indulge in a fantasy of enslaved people, and by extension, all of Black America, as submissive, self-effacing, loyal, pacified, and pacifying. It positions Black people as boxed in, pre-packaged, and ready to satisfy. It's the problem of all consumption, only laced with racial overtones." So I thought that was pretty powerful.
This is where I think, like I said, I have a limited perspective. I can't claim to understand in any way, shape, or form what the Black community goes through and has gone through. But I can say that it makes me sick that there are people out there who are angry that there's progress being made and removal, elimination of, it's not history, it's racism.
Yeah. If anything, I think we're missing the history component. I think we need more of that, teaching some of these things that did happen, a better understanding of the history. It'd be good to give people a lesson on Aunt Jemima or where some of these things came from. This history is what we're lacking.
Mm-hmm. When you learn the backstories, racial stereotypes that have been infused in these brands, it's mind-numbing. We're still having this conversation that we can't look back and go, that was medieval. You know what I mean? Like that was like hundreds of years ago. Like we've moved past that as a human race, and we can say with certainty that we are better now. I feel like, how can we not say that at this point? But we can't. We're clearly not able to do that. And, we can only hope for a time when we can, right?
That's what we need to keep working at, rather than, seems like we just keep getting caught in these cycles. We keep working toward it, but it's just so built in so many ways. And, the brands and marketing is just one of them. It's just one of these ways where it's just injected in like so deep in ways that a lot of people, probably ourselves included, just don't even realize that it's there, but it's there. And, a lot of people in the Black community, they know it's there, but we almost don't even see it because we've been blind to it for so long. And it's just, these are the things we need to just find and get out if we ever want to move forward and do better.
Yeah, absolutely. I did read Angela R. Riley and Sonia K. Cattell, both a law professor at University of California in Los Angeles and a law professor at the University of California, Berkeley. This article, they were talking a little bit about the rebranding, American marketing, and how that's shifting and changing. And one of the things they said was, brands can no longer stand apart from social movements and activism in order to succeed. They have to personify change to be the change through rebranding themselves. And something that we've talked about often on the podcast, right, is brands can be a part of that shift and help educate even with their efforts. They can help spur change, just like they've done with COVID-19, the PSAs that they've implemented to help educate. They can do the same thing with education of systemic racism by rebranding. They can be helping push forward change, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's part of the duty of brands. It's most of them want to do good. It's almost part of every brand's mission is in some way making the world better. So I think it's part of their obligation when these things happen, whether it's COVID, whether it's a movement like this, is how can you help? What can you do to forward the conversation or make things better, whether it's internally within your company or whether it's, externally within your community or the world at large? What can you bring to the table to make things a little bit better?
So what do you think's next for these brands? How are they going to change their identity? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think they'll do something to keep the brand kind of recognizable to people, whether that's font or color or something like that. But I don't know what they'll do with as far as like the name. That's kind of what I'm most interested in. What do you think?
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I'm not sure how they can keep any part of the old brand to make a dramatic enough statement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like it's got to be a complete overhaul.
They'll lose some of the recognition, but all of them get a publicity bump, at least when the initial product debuts, because like this conversation is happening now, there'll be a continuation of that when the new version hits. Hopefully, I think positive if they change it enough. I imagine more negative if they don't.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, they've got to make a very strong statement out of the gate. You can't just half-ass this effort. You have to be all in.
Yeah, if you're going to do it, if you don't put your whole heart into it, it's going to show. And, you talk about authenticity. If you only do it halfway, people will probably be like, you only did that because of what was happening at the moment and because you felt that pressure. There was nothing authentic about that.
Yeah. Going back to that original question, if it's meaningful change, if they're doing it for the right reasons, that will show through immediately.
Yeah. So that'll be something interesting to watch.
Yeah, for sure. So I hope as listeners, if feel free to let us know your own opinions. We obviously want to hear those. And you could do that at podcast@speakinghuman.com.
It's a tough topic to have a dialogue on, but it's an important topic to have a dialogue on. So any listener feedback is appreciated. Hit us up with those emails. We'll be back before you know it with another episode of Speaking Human. Catch you then, humans.
Speaking Human.